everyone for joining us. My name is Josh Campbell. I'm the CEO of Techonomy. Really appreciate you spending some time with us on this Friday morning here on the East Coast. This continues our series of weekly sessions. Started 2 months ago with John Chambers. Probably didn't expect to still be 2 months later hosting these from my basement, but you know, it's definitely been fun having all of you join us. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to David to moderate the conversation with Brian.
Thank you, Josh. Got to remember to unmute. I'm excited because Brian is somebody who I've known for an awfully long time. I've thought of him as one of the best business journalists in the country for an awfully long time. We worked together at Fortune, and he's now tackled what is arguably the most important company in not only the US, but the global economy, possibly the hardest one to understand also. So I'm looking forward to having him help us further understand it. And I highly recommend his new book, Bezonomics, which is only recently published, but it's been out for about 2 weeks, Brian?
That's right, David.
Well, Brian, welcome. And
thanks, David. Pleasure to be here.
Well, you know, I think maybe you should start out, you know, your book is so much about the culture and what Bezos has done differently and how he thinks differently, which is, I guess, why you called it Bezonomics. When you think of it, what is Bezonomics exactly?
Great question, David. And that's something I spent 2 years in talking to 150 different people trying to figure out. And I'll give it my best shot here and try to reflect what I argued in the book. So to understand Bezonomics, I have to take you back to a time that's somewhat similar to today. We're in a crisis. It was 2001. The dot-com stock bubble had burst. Amazon's stock price had gone from $107 a share down to $6 a share. Barron's had written a cover story titled Amazon.bomb. Wall Street analysts were saying that Amazon was going to run out of cash by the end of the year. Then 9/11 hit. It put the economy into a tailspin, and things looked even more dire for Amazon. About that time, fall of 2001, Bezos called a management consultant to visit him and his board in Seattle, Jim Collins, who was just publishing what was going to turn out to be one of the most successful business books of all time, Good to Great. And when Jim went up to Seattle to meet with Bezos and his board, he said, you know, in times like this, you want to respond not by reacting to bad news, but by building a flywheel. And Collins went on to explain his concept of a flywheel, which is fairly familiar to most of you in the audience out there, I'm sure. You're all shrewd business people. And Bezos immediately started sketching his idea of how Amazon's flywheel would work. And it was that flywheel that drove Amazon out of near bankruptcy to the success it is today. So what Bezos' sketch looked like, it started with the customer. His idea was you do everything for the customer. Forget the competition. It's the customer. You know, forget internal politics. It's the customer. Everything begins and ends with the customer. As a matter of fact, when I was doing interviews out in Seattle with Amazon executives, every one of them at some point in the conversation would say, everything starts with the customer. It's almost as if Amazon's scientists had installed a microchip in their brain, which caused them to say that in every interview they gave to the press. So Bezos's flywheel sketch started with the customer. The idea is if you do everything for the customer, you're going to start to attract more customers. If you attract more customers, you're going to attract more sellers on the Amazon platform. If you attract more sellers on the Amazon platform, you're going to gain economies of scale. You're going to grow your revenues. You're going to gain economies of scale which is going to allow you to lower prices for your customer and give them more great services, whether it's Prime, Prime Video, Amazon streaming music, 2-day delivery, now 1-day delivery. And if you do that, you're going to attract more customers, and then you're going to attract more sellers. You're going to get more economies of scale, and that's going to allow you to do more for your customers. And the flywheel starts turning and turning faster and faster. And it's no one big event that turns a flywheel. It's not a big acquisition, or it's not one innovation per se. It's every day constantly pushing that flywheel. And that's what Bezos created back then, and that's what's still driving the company today, although with a significant change, and I get into this in the book as well. Bezos is now applying artificial intelligence, machine learning to his flywheel. So the flywheel is turning faster and getting smarter on its own. A good example of this, I visited Jeff Wilke, who's the #2 at Amazon, and I interviewed him for the book. Many people think that if Jeff was flying up to space in one of its rockets and it exploded, God forbid, Wilke would take over.
More likely than being hit by a bus in his case. Yeah.
Or get hit. Well, yeah, hit by the bus, the old way of talking about that.
No, but in Bezos' case, I think a space explosion much more pertinent. Go ahead.
It's much more, absolutely. And Wilke said they used to have these meetings with 60 Amazon managers, and they had data that they had been collecting, but they were trying to decide, okay, what products are hot, which ones should we stock where, what color shirts should we order if we have a hot shirt on that we're selling. Now all those decisions are being made by algorithms. And an algorithm, will see that there's increased demand in California right before the Rose Bowl, so it'll ship more coolers to those nearby warehouses, and so decisions that are used to be made by humans are now being made by algorithms, and that's part of the power of Amazon today. It's one of the reasons they were able to respond so quickly to the surge in demand in this pandemic. Their sales were up in the first quarter this year, 26%. And for a $280 billion corporation, that's a huge increase. I think they said their retail sales were up. I mean, the math's not going to work because there's more in that 280 billion than just retail. But they said their sales were up about 78 billion in the first quarter. And listen, their deliveries were slower. They couldn't fulfill the 2-day promise, or now the 1-day promise, which they're moving towards. And they were only selling essential items at first, and some of their deliveries took as long as 4 days, but they were still able to get things to people. And it was because of that flywheel. It's because algorithms were making those decisions. So to me, that was one of the key mind positions of Bezos that really allowed Amazon to grow. There are other cultural issues that I get into in the book, but I'd say the AI flywheel is really the juice that's pushing Amazon right now.
Well, and being able to execute once you make that decision is obviously not every company's capability. But I mean, it's interesting because your book does address this issue of competing with Amazon in some length. And some of the people on this Zoom might recall not many weeks ago, we had Alex Kantrowitz, who also has a book that talks a lot about competing with Amazon, although it's also about Facebook, Microsoft, Apple, and Google, called Always Day One. It takes its title from an Amazon phenomenon, the thing that they always say at Amazon, it's always day one. And he talks also about AI. But the question I have for you regarding the flywheel is, can any company have a flywheel like that? Is it really something that is unique to Amazon? And if any other company, at least in theory, could similarly construct something analogous, would it by definition also be oriented around customer obsession almost necessarily?
Great questions, David. So yes, other companies can build flywheels and try to compete with Amazon. And historically, other companies have built flywheels too. And Jim Collins talks about those companies like Nucor Steel way back in the 1990s, the 2000s, first mini mills, and they had their mini mill flywheel, cheaper technology, more efficient technology, and they kept building on it, gaining more customers, proving it, building on it. You can do that. The problem with an AI flywheel is that it takes a tremendous amount of data. And the big tech platforms, whether it's Amazon or Google or Facebook, have collected already tremendous amounts of data. So anyone trying to create a flywheel from scratch right now would be at a disadvantage. I mean, think about Google's advantage on search and all the data they've collected on, what people search for and, who's searching for certain things, and they crunch all that to give you the best search results. That's really hard to replicate at the scale that Google's doing it. Same with Amazon. They know so much about their customers. It'd be hard for another retailer to replicate that at this point, especially on online retail. Your second part of your question about does it have to start with the customer? No, it doesn't have to start with the customer. It depends on the industry you're in. It could start with technology. If you just want to be the best in a particular technology, and if that's your strategy, you can build a flywheel around that. But I think the most common way to approach it is through the customer.
Well, Dan Elron has put into the chat, and Dan is a very senior consultant at Accenture and a very close friend of Techonomy's. He says, Amazon seems to have a unique culture and sense of urgency, making it better managed than many of its competitors. I guess that's really the question I was asking before. Is Amazon sine qua non or something, whatever that Latin cliche is? Is it so singular that we will never see anything else quite like it? And is it really a unique cultural set of advantages and in a unique leader that has allowed this sense of urgency, as Dan points out, is so tangible there?
Yeah, well, look, I think other companies could copy it, but it's not easy. Bezos is responsible for creating the culture he has at Amazon, and he's been very consistent about it. He consistently talks about customer obsession, extreme innovation, and long-term vision. And the customer obsession part causes him to drive for the truth, which I think makes it unusual in terms of a corporate culture. I mean, he hates corporate politics. He hates inward-looking executives who are protecting their turf. He hates corporate communications. I mean, he thinks it's a big waste of time.
Is he capable of rooting out executives that are protecting their turf? I mean, it's easy to hate them, but they're often very good political operators, and they mask it to the CEO in many companies, right?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true, David. But Bezos is confrontational, and he's a CEO who has grown a crew of executives. He calls them the S team for senior team, a group of executives who know how he thinks, they know how he hates politics, and they've been with him a long time. And one of the reasons he was able to create this team is he has this process called the shadow, and he has a young executive follow him for 2 years, going to every meeting, every day, doing special projects for him. I mean, Andy Jassy, who does not have a tech background, runs AWS, the largest cloud computing company in the world, but he was one of Bezos's shadows. And he figured out, what Bezos wants, how he thinks. And what Bezos wants is he tries to seek the truth. I mean, everybody's heard of his famous 6-pagers, right? Those memos that you have to write before you pitch an idea. And that's a way of ferreting out the truth. It's hard to hide behind, politics, vague ideas. If you have to read and defend a 6-page memo at every meeting where there's a new idea, and then constantly follow up as that project or service is being developed to make sure it still adheres to the original vision of the 6-page memo.
Do even the S team people write those 6-page memos themselves?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely,
Because,
everybody does. You can't.
because that would root out pure politics. Because you can't really present something in that detail that's then hammered at by a whole group of people in a meeting, which is the way they do it. They all read it collectively for 20 minutes in the conference room, blah, blah.
That's absolutely right.
I mean, I also love what you say. I do have some problem believing it, except the results do speak for themselves. This no sycophants culture, which you're implying, but I just want to pull that out of your book. You say they have that. And I mean, honestly, those of us who've operated in big companies know that's extremely rare.
Yeah, no, it is. It is extremely rare. And, some of the executives at Amazon have signs on their office saying, "In God we trust, all others bring data." And it's a hard culture. It's a hard confrontational culture based on the data. And a lot of people don't make it. If it's sort of a Navy SEALs like environment at the top for management, it's up or out. Bezos has his famous nutters. If he doesn't agree with what you're saying, I mean, he'll scream at you and say something like, "Have I taken my stupid pills today?" He's a very tough confrontational manager, and someone who just tries to rise through Amazon by sucking up is eventually, I think, going to be found out. And it's not the kind of thing that Bezos like. Look, I'm sure it's a huge organization now. It's 800,000 people. And I'm sure there's some sycophants somewhere within that organization or getting away with it. But, I have a scene in my book, Bezonomics, where Bezos is addressing an all hands meeting at Amazon. And he says, "We're going to fail. We're going to go out of business." He said, "Most companies last 30 years. We're already 25 years old, and we're going to fail. And we're going to fail because we no longer embrace the day one philosophy." And the day one philosophy in his mind is like every day you have to put the amount of effort in as if it were a startup on the first day, and the amount of energy and inspiration that it takes to get a startup off the ground. Now, do I think Amazon's going to fail in 5 years? No, I don't think it's going to fail in 5 years, but he's terrified of organizational complacency. I think that's one of his biggest fears, is that Amazon has become so big and so successful that it's going to become complacent. It's going to take its eye off the customer. It's going to worry more about internal politics than the customer. It might worry more about the competition than the customer. And then the flywheel is going to start slowing down. And then there's decay. And then there's ultimately death. That's how he thinks.
I keep wanting to come back to this issue of competing and how other companies ought to take inspiration from this. I mean, in effect, do you believe that every company would be better off if they adopted some version of that culture?
Well, I think that they would, in the sense, I mean, I've covered business for 3 decades at Fortune, and I mean, so many companies have been hurt, or they've gone off track because of politics. The wrong people get into the wrong jobs. They say they care for their customers, and they don't really. I mean, how many airline ads have you seen where it's like, "We put the customer first"? And like anyone who's ever flown knows that's not true, right? Small seats, peanuts, pay for the peanuts, pay not to sit next to someone on the airline. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right there. So you got to focus. If your flywheel is driven by the customer, then you have to focus on that.
The reason, I have a list of questions about all these different things they do. It's so astonishing, the number of things they have done well, that, it really does cause one to scratch one's head, which is why your book is so valuable and necessary to really scrutinize these people, as well as to understand whether their scale is just plain wrong. Let's go to the poll results, Josh, just quickly.
Great.
If you could
love
look those up.
these.
We should just look at those. Okay. People order monthly. Well, that's not my answer, I'm afraid. Okay. At home, I don't allow any of those to spy on me is the majority, only slightly greater than Alexa, and Google Home is hardly used in this crowd. Nobody uses Cortana or HomePod. Interesting. Okay, they love Amazon. 61% love Amazon, although obviously many also answered these other questions. I know I said I both love and fear it myself. Breakup is too severe, but regulation is needed. Okay, let's go to that in a second. Amazon's market cap will hit 2 trillion in 2022. I was pleased to come up with that question, by the way. Half the people could live without Prime, and the other half could not live without Prime. Okay. What's anything that surprised you? Comment on anything there, Brian.
Well, I'm not surprised by the number of people who can't live without Prime. There's a survey that I came across which said that among millennials and Gen Zers, 77% said they'd rather go without alcohol for a year than give up their Prime account. And 44% said they'd rather give up sex for a year than give up their Amazon Prime account. I think that might say more about the lifestyles of the millennials and the Gen Zers, but I found
certainly would not have been true of the baby boomers. Let's just put it that way. Anyway.
Yeah, and Georgetown did a poll on Amazon
at that age.
That it's the most respected institution.
This age, it would probably be a given that's true for the baby boomers. But anyway, go on.
Yeah, that's true. It's the most respected institution among Democrats, hands down. Among Republicans, only the military and the local police were more respected as an institution than Amazon. And that puts Amazon ahead of the courts, university systems, and organized religion. And I think now 57% of American households have Prime and 52% attend church. So if you're a customer, there's a huge admiration for Amazon. If you're a competitor, there's a huge fear and hatred of Amazon. And if you're a worker in one of their warehouses, I mean, there's a lot of these days discontent among the workforce in Amazon. There have been strikes, not large strikes. There have been attempts to unionize the warehouses. Amazon has fired 6 of their employees for, they say, violating COVID distancing rules, and those employees say it was for pointing out safety deficiencies in the warehouses or trying to organize labor unions. So it's a mixed bag. I went into the book with an open mind, and I found a lot of good things about Amazon, and I found a lot of scary things about Amazon too. But to the most part, it's really hard to answer the question, are they good or are they bad? It really depends on where you're coming from. If you're a customer, they're great. You get fast delivery, low prices, you get free video, you get cheap streaming music, you get great cloud service. But if you're a competitor or a worker, it can be a different story.
The contradictions do abound when it comes to this company. I mean, despite the survey results that you describe about how people think they're so great and respect them so much, I mean, this group thinks they should be regulated. We just saw that. And both the right and the left in American politics are strongly threatening to regulate in some form, in some cases break up. In fact, both Trump and Elizabeth Warren have talked about draconian pushback on Amazon.
Yeah, well, Trump's saying that because he hates Bezos, because Bezos owns the Washington Post, and the Washington Post dings Trump every day. So Trump's thrashing out at Twitter these days. I mean, he's been thrashing out at Amazon, and there's accusations that he ditched the Amazon deal on the JEDI contract, cloud computing for the Pentagon, which was awarded to Microsoft, and Amazon's appealing that decision. But the accusations are that Trump, talked to the Pentagon and said, don't give the deal to Amazon. I mean, he actually said in public, don't give the deal to Amazon, but there's no proof yet that he actually told the Pentagon not to do it. Now, breaking it up is complicated. Under antitrust laws in the US, a company can be broken up if it is hurting the consumer. That's the #1 test under today's antitrust laws. Well, you can't argue that Amazon is hurting the consumer. They're giving them lower prices, faster delivery. I mean, the day may come when they have so much power that they are raising prices, or they are slowing deliveries. But with Bezos there, it's hard to imagine that would ever happen, because that's his mantra. So if you can't break them up under the current antitrust laws, how do you break them up? Well, you break them up on a political basis. You fear that they've grown too big and too powerful. I mean, that's what Teddy Roosevelt did when he broke up the trusts. Standard Oil was actually good for consumers because it was lowering the price of petroleum. But they had gotten so powerful that Roosevelt felt that they were more powerful than the federal government, and they had to be broken up. So if Amazon's broken up, I think it'll be on the basis that politicians fear that they're just getting too powerful. But I looked at that hard, and Amazon, yes, controls 38% of online retail in the United States. But online retail is only about 10% of all retail in the US, maybe a little higher now since the pandemic. But that means Amazon controls only about 5% of retail. Globally, they control only 1% of all retail. So, in terms of accumulation of power, like, why not go after Walmart, which controls 56% of all groceries in the US? You don't hear any politicians talking about that. I think part of it is that if you attack Amazon, you get a lot of attention because Bezos is the richest man in the world. Bernie Sanders named his anti-Amazon bill the Stop Bezos Act. I mean, you just get a lot of PR, you get a lot of attention when you attack, a fast-growing, successful company with the world's richest person at the helm.
Wow. Shoshana asked, and I don't know if it's Shoshana Zuboff or who, but it's someone named Shoshana, what really is so scary about Amazon?
About Amazon?
Yeah.
That's a great question.
And could I just also, Jane Clark said she wanted to ask a question, but you have to type it into us, Jane, and then I'll answer for you. Ask it for you. Go ahead.
Okay, there are a number of things on the scary scale about Amazon. In Bezonomics, I point out that, at least to me, the scariest thing is how good they are at automating the physical world. And I think that's going to end up with massive employment disruption. So they bought Kiva robotics system back in 2012. And they've used Kiva to automate their warehouses. But there's still a piece of the warehouse process that they haven't been able to automate yet, and that's the picking and stowing of goods. So when goods come into a warehouse at Amazon, first of all, by one estimate, they sell over 600 million different products on their website. So you imagine the variety of products, the different shapes and sizes they come in, the different packaging material. And right now, that's really hard for a picking and stowing robot to grab those things and put it in the right bin and pull it out and put it in another right bin for it to be shipped out of the warehouse. But I talked to a bunch of engineers who are working on this project, both inside of Amazon and outside of Amazon. And the ones outside of Amazon believe that within 3 to 5 years, they're going to have picking robots that are accurate enough so that Amazon would use them. Amazon downplays this. They say that, oh no, it's years and years away because of the ramifications. They have about 450,000 warehouse and delivery workers right now. A lot of those will be out of a job if Amazon perfects the picking robot and the stowing robot. And then they're investing heavily in electrified, self-driving delivery vans. I mean, they have already invested in Aurora, which is one of the top self-driving software firms. They're run by three top technologists one was from Google in their Waymo project, Chris Urban, I'm sure many of you have heard of him. Another one was from Uber, and then the third one was from, Google, Uber, and Tesla. Thank you. So when you can automate deliveries, first of all, you cut out a tremendous amount of cost from your delivery bottom line. And Amazon 2018 spent $28 billion on deliveries. And they could save billions more that would go to the bottom line, or that they could use to make things cheaper and more convenient for their customers and make the flywheel move faster by going towards automated delivery vans. And just this week, there's a rumor that they're going to buy Zoox, which is another, I think I'm pronouncing it right, it's Z-O-O-X, another self-driving software company in Silicon Valley. They have a partnership with Toyota to build self-driving delivery vans. And they were supposed to unveil one at the Olympics, but that has obviously been postponed because of the pandemic. They're already using these automated robots called Scout that will drive themselves through the street, alert you by text when they've arrived. You say, okay, and you type in a code, you walk out, the top pops open, and you pick up your package, and that's it. And then the Scout returns to a local distribution center, picks up another package or two, and then delivers those. And they have their whole drone air force that they're working on as well. I mean, McKinsey estimates worst case scenario that by 2030, automation, it's not Amazon, but automation in general, could displace as many as 30% of jobs globally. And so that's to me, one of the scariest things about Amazon. And I think it dwarfs the current concern, which are serious concerns, but about how workers are treated in Amazon's warehouses.
Yeah, okay, there's a lot of questions about the dichotomy between loving customers and not loving employees. Josh, though, is going to go to a couple of our questions.
Great. Let's first go to Jordan Green. You should be on audio now, be able to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hey, Brian, how are you?
Hey, Jordan, thanks for coming.
My pleasure. I have a question regarding Amazon's view of their advertising units growth. Very quietly last year, it did about $10 billion in revenue. So so my questions for you are ultimately, one, what is the internal view of their advertising unit? And if there is a split up, does it qualify as a third component that needs to be split out as well, with retail, AWS, and then advertising being that third unit?
Yeah, Jordan, that's a great question, spot on. Advertising, as you said, came from almost nowhere to become a $10 billion business last year. And I talked to Wilkie about this, and he said, for years, Amazon resisted advertising on their site because they were afraid it was going to hurt the consumer experience. They felt that if they cluttered their sites with ads, that it would turn people off. Now, he also told me that they're beginning to believe that they could do ads in such a way that consumers wouldn't be turned off. And that's when they started doing more and more advertising. Now, I don't know, I think Wilkie might be wrong on this, because I think the experience on Amazon has gotten worse because of the ads. I mean, you're not sure whether you're seeing something that has great reviews, or is it because someone's paid the most for a good SEO, right? So they come at the top of the page, because basically if you're not on the first or maybe the second page on Amazon, you're dead, you don't exist. And I think it's also given it the page a more cluttered feel. But that said, it's potentially another third profitable leg of Amazon with AWS and retail, as you pointed out, and it could be a standalone business. Amazon's been pretty good on privacy with consumer data up till now. And if they really grow with advertising, that's going to open up a can of beans. I mean, the same one that faces Facebook and Google, where you start giving consumer data to advertisers or advertising firms that need to know who they're reaching, when they're reaching them, et cetera, et cetera. And that could raise privacy concerns that Amazon has not yet had. And so, yeah, I think it could be a third business, and it is growing super fast. It's growing at the same rate as Google grew its advertising revenues in Google's early days. So it seems like it's on its way to the top, but they're going to have to overcome those problems of turning off the customers of a cluttered page because of a cluttered page and the privacy issues.
Great, thanks. I guess next we'll go over to one of our other members, Dick Reisman. You should be able to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I'm wondering, can you sort of expand more? It seems like there's a schizoid nature to Amazon. It's a great poster child for customer obsession and value, but it's a deplorable poster child for cutthroat treatment of employees, business partners, the community. Do you see a way to get them to be more balanced? And also, how would you compare them to Apple, which in some ways has a similar schizoid character? And both of them have this culture of secrecy and insularity that's kind of amazing, that you can't get any information on what goes inside, especially Amazon's even worse, I think.
Yeah, no, Dick, that's a great question. Really insightful. Thank you for that. I think there used to be a lot of similarities between Apple and Amazon in terms of their secrecy, but in the last year or so, Bezos has realized that the company's come under such pressure for either the way they've treated their employees or their environmental footprint, that they have to open up more. A few years ago, he hired Jay Carney, who used to be a Time Inc. journalist. He ran the Washington Bureau for Time magazine, and then he was Obama's press secretary at the White House, to head communications. And Amazon used to be super secretive, but now they have 250 PR people trying to explain what's going on. And I think Bezos is being forced to be more open and maybe change Amazon's ways so that they're less hated by certain segments of the left and the right. Part of that was his $10 billion pledge. Now that was a personal pledge, but $10 billion pledge to help climate change. And he's also recently set tough climate goals for Amazon internally. They want to go zero carbon footprint. The worker treatment thing, I looked into that very deeply for the book. And look, any organization that big is going to have employees who complain. But I compared employee complaints at Amazon warehouses with other warehouses, for example, Walmart. And, they're no different than Walmart's. And the job was rated on job sites on the internet at 3 stars out of 5 for Amazon, 3 stars out of 5 for Walmart. But Amazon is a huge target for unionization, and I think a lot of that, a lot of the complaints come from that. Now, granted, a warehouse job is a tough job. It's repetitive, it's hard physically. They work long hours, and there's no getting around that. And Amazon could do things to make people's lives easier. It's not an easy job, and it's a high burnout job. But that said, you can't make that kind of job a great job that's really easy and comfortable for everybody. It's just not in the nature of it. But on other issues, I think they're really trying to come around to being more of the good guy. For example, the second quarter, they said they're going to spend $4 billion making their warehouses safer for their employees because of the pandemic. They bought 100 million masks. They're creating a whole testing system for their employees, which is a good thing for their employees. But knowing Bezos, he'll probably take that and turn it into a business down the line. you know, Amazon testing services for other corporations, for local governments or whatever. But anyway, I think there's a sea change that I'm not seeing at Apple with Bezos, and they may change, but it's going to take a long time.
Brian, one of the good questions we just got from J.W. Morris is pertinent to this idea of Bezos changing. He or she asked, has Bezos changed since his divorce? He certainly changed visually, it seems to me.
Yes,
But,
he's gone from like geek to the rock, right? Wearing his vest and his aviator glasses, and look, I think Hollywood's gone to his head a bit. You know, Amazon's one of the biggest investors in film production now, and he goes to award ceremonies. As you all know, his new fiance was a Fox newscaster. She's also a helicopter pilot, which is kind of ironic because Bezos was almost killed in a helicopter crash, and he said he was going to avoid riding in helicopters. Now, why he married he's going to marry a helicopter pilot, I don't know. He's, you know, bought a big house in LA. I think it was Geffen's house that he bought. He's got the biggest single family home that he's renovating in Washington, DC. He's combined two buildings that used to be a textile museum, and he's, you know, I can't even tell you how many bedrooms and bathrooms it has. It's you can find it in the book, but I just can't remember. And then in New York, he's got an 8 or 10 story penthouse in Madison Park, which he just bought and he's renovating.
Right across from the
coming out into the world, you know. Sorry, David.
I just said it's right across from the Techonomy office.
There we go. You know,
if we ever go there again, but keep going. So he's got all this real estate. So is he different? Did it change him?
I think, look, I don't know. To be honest, you know, to me, it looks like a midlife crisis, but I have no idea what's actually going on in his head about this. He, I think, is one big change these days. I think he's much more obsessed with colonizing outer space than he is with Amazon. Mm. And although the pandemic has brought him back in temporarily, I mean, he used to spend 1 day a week at Blue Origin, a space company, 4 days a week at Amazon. Now I believe he's back all 5 days at Amazon. But, you know, there's an argument that the reason he started Amazon was not to make money per se, but was to have the wherewithal to colonize Mars. Because he truly believes, it sounds nuts, but he truly believes that this is the only way we're going to save mankind if the population of the globe is going to grow from over 7 billion to 10 billion by mid-century. We don't have the resources, so you turn Earth into a residential and light industrial zone, and then you move all the mining and heavy industry to outer space, and he wants to make cheap rockets so that, you know, the next generation, the next 2, 3, 4, 5 generations of entrepreneurs will have a cheap way to get to outer space and create these new businesses. I mean, as I said, he's a real long-term thinker. You know, he thinks in terms not just of, you know, years or decades, but he thinks in terms of centuries. So he looks at his rockets as sort of the next generation of internet, the way the internet allowed companies like Amazon and Google and Facebook to grow, and the internet was funded and started by the federal government to make communications on the internet affordable. In the same way, he thinks rockets, if he can make them cheap enough, and the way he's going to do that is they land after they're shot up in the air, as opposed to rockets today, which explode or destroyed. He said it's like flying a 747 to San Francisco, and after everybody gets off the plane, you blow it up. It's just not a good economic model.
Yeah. Wait, Brian, we've got to wrap it momentarily, but what you just said reminded me of one of the more interesting passages about him in your book, which is about his relationship to his grandfather, his mother's father. And his family life was sort of, you know, not so great, but his grandfather was a huge influence on him, and himself was a major federal innovation official. So talk about that.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, David. He was born he had his mother, Jackie, and then his father was actually named Jurgensen. And Bezos is his stepfather's last name. And Jurgensen was a carnival unicyclist who had a drinking problem. And he left Bezos when he was 2 or 3 years old. And then Jackie, his mother, remarried Mike Bezos, who's a Cuban immigrant. He fled in the 1960s from Cuba to get out of the Castro regime, get away from the Castro regime. And he became a petroleum engineer at Exxon. But the key to Jeff's upbringing, and Jeff talks about this a lot, is his grandfather, Pop Geiss, Jackie's father. Summers, Bezos and his siblings would go to Pop Geiss's ranch, the Lazy G in Texas. And one of the most important things that Pop Geiss taught Bezos was resourcefulness. They used to build fences, irrigation systems. They built a prefab house. They rebuilt an old Caterpillar tractor.
Yeah, but say what Geiss did in his career before he retired.
Right, and I was getting there. So I was thinking, okay, yeah, so Bezos is resourceful, big deal, right? How do you get from son of a inebriated unicyclist to building and running Amazon with 800,000 employees? And when I look back into Pop Geiss's background, he ran the Los Alamos labs. He had 26,000 employees under him. He had access to some of the greatest technological secrets of his age. He used to tell Bezos stories about the Cold War and building missile defense systems to combat the Russians. And in a sense, it made Bezos one of the most pro-government tech titans out there. I mean, Bezos doesn't have a problem with selling facial recognition systems, which Amazon has designed, to government entities around the world. He doesn't have a problem selling them cloud computing systems to the Pentagon and to the CIA, et cetera, et cetera. So Pop Geiss had this incredible influence on him in terms of resourcefulness, but also helps explain how a person came from that kind of background to lead Amazon.
Yeah, really good. Brian, so much. You're going to be talking about this and answering all the many questions we didn't get time for the next 5 years, I'm sure. Maybe we'll have you back to do it again at Techonomy.
I would love to, David.
Thank you so much
for this opportunity. It was great.
It's great to have you. I'm going to turn it back to Josh, who can thank you further and thank Copperfield for jointly hosting this with us, and continue on.
Great. No, thanks, Brian. Thanks, David, for a great conversation.